Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm joined by Dr. Scott Goldman. Scott, welcome.
It's good to see you again and always fun to catch up.
Scott, we're probably on about episode 320. You've probably been a guest on about 200 of those, so it's great to see you again. Well, look, it's always a joy and a pleasure to speak with you, and I learned so much talking with you. Real delight to have you back on. And although you have been a guest 6, 7, 8, 9, 300 times, whatever it is, and most people tuning in will know about you and your work, but do give us a refresh here and give us some up-to-date knowledge about what you've been doing.
Yeah. So, I think sometimes the easiest way to explain my craft is really just to say, hey, I'm a psychologist. However, I've noticed that as we've grown and evolved in the world of sports psychology, the scope and definition of the work has become more confusing. So it's like, are you a psychologist who helps with the culture? Are you a psychologist who helps with performance? Are you a psychologist who helps with mental health? And though I'm trained to do all of those things, I think the way that I've sort of redesigned my contribution to an organization is I report to ownership and then I try to serve as a resource in all three of those domains that we just listed. So I'm trying to come up with a nice, succinct way of saying, this is what I do. But I have found my colleagues, peers, and I try to say this with grace and politeness, but I found that my colleagues and peers, they keep coming up with new, crazier titles for themselves and then new kind of buzzworthy like phrasing of deliverables that I just get the sense is confusing everybody. So I guess simply put, and I'm just kind of, thanks for letting me kind of process it out loud. I think simply put, psychology is the study of human behavior and human interaction. And I just try to be of service to organizations across multiple planes and domains.
You're a sports psychologist who works at every level of the organization.
Yeah, there you go. See, I knew, there it is. Where were you when I was making my business cards?
We've written your CV, or at least the
There it
title.
is. Yeah.
Perfect, brilliant.
Wait, can
Okay.
you say that one more time? I really do. I do like that one. That's
You're,
good.
you're a sports psychologist that works at every level of the organization.
There it is. So I'm a sports psychologist that works at every level of the organization. That's what I do.
And you've worked in multiple sporting organizations over the years. Give us a flavor of some of those organizations. Who have you worked for, Scott?
Yeah, so I've worked for 4 NFL teams. And when I say work for, I don't just mean like fly in, fly out. I mean like embedded, like sleeping in my office on a couch, long days kind of thing. I've worked for 2 2 NBA teams, and I've worked for 1 Major League Baseball team, and then I've worked for 2 universities, athletic departments. And here in the United States, athletic departments, especially now with the NIL and the transfer portal and everything else, I'd make the argument like when I was at the University of Michigan, they had a larger operating budget than some of the professional teams that we work with. And then I've just recently added to my portfolio working with a national governing body, which I'm super excited about.
That transfer portal, that's an interesting, it's an Englishman looking across the pond, college players seeking to gain a transfer from program to program. Is that basically how it works? And do you think that's changed the landscape for sports psychologists? So many sports psychs work at the college level or within colleges, and I'm guessing that's broadened the scope of their work a little bit. Would I be right in saying that?
Yeah, so I mean, look, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I used to phrase it to a coach, it was an adoption. I'm going to adopt this player for 4 years. But for the player, it was more like a marriage. This is the only team I'll ever play for. And then they started to come up with ways for people to transfer, but you needed a rationale and you had to lobby with the NCAA as a governing body to say, hey, here's a good enough reason for why I'm transferring. And then people kind of migrated from that to being like, well, why can't we, like coaches can leave at any point in time without penalty. Why can't players? So now it's kind of just the wild, wild west in a way. So what you have is you have these windows where the portal opens, and then players enter their name into the ring, and then any team can kind of go and pluck, so to speak. So it becomes massive chaos because you have X number of players, Y number of teams, and it's like speed dating. So when you talk about the role of the psychologist, it kind of hits in a lot of different ways. Yeah, I'm a big believer. Like I think players don't fail, and I think teams don't fail. But I believe the match or the partnership between those two is where failure occurs. So what can happen with the transfer portal is sometimes the reason you leave team X might go with you when you join team Y, if that makes sense. And then when you add also the NIL, the name, image, and likeness stuff, now you're talking about massive amounts of money. I mean, some players are getting paid up to $12 million,
What?
and that's at the collegiate level. Yeah.
At the collegiate level, wow. And so the in between piece, the in between the coaches and the players, is that where culture and environment lies? Do you think is that where these programs have to strive to get it absolutely spot on? The in between is our culture, our environment, and optimizing those to give the players the feeling that they've got the very best opportunity to succeed there, or is it kind of a little bit more out of a program's control?
Well, so like let's kind of go from a time linear mindset. I think you and I would both agree, like you get the right people on the bus and you're already going to start your way to a path of success. So there's first is the engagement, which used to start with the recruiting process, right? And some of these players were recruited, during their high school years. I mean, there are some sports at the collegiate level where they'll start recruiting people in middle school. And so you have this long building relationship. But then with the transfer portal, you have this almost like frenetic speed dating where it's like, well, and you know how the psychology works, right? Like, I've been courting this person for 5 years, but this person just became available at the 11 o'clock hour. And we know that the 11 o'clock hour person, like the research talks about, the 11 o'clock hour person is more often than not going to be the one perceived as a more attractive candidate than the one that you've been studying or investing in for 5 years. So, I mean, some teams, some college teams are even saying, we're no longer even going to scout high school players. We're just strictly going to work the portal. And then it becomes the idea of like, okay, so are you going after players that come from like mid-major programs or Division II programs where you're going, hey, they really showed that they could play at the next level? Or are you going after someone who's from a major program but failed for whatever reason and you think they'll be better? So I think 90%, I made that number up, 90%, maybe actually to make it more believable, we'll say 87.97%. I mean, if we're going to make up a number, let's make it up all the way. But I do
Yeah.
think, I think the heaviest lift is getting the right people in the building. And if you get that right, then you have on the back end a lot easier when it comes to building the culture or the community. Because going back to where does psychology kind of insert itself, what I hear from a lot of coaches right now is there's been a real shift in power. There's a lot of player entitlement, and managing people while still maintaining a high level of standards is a real challenge. Because if a player doesn't want to show up to an activity, he can just say, I'm not doing it. And then the coach goes, but I need
Wow.
you to. And he goes, well, I don't want to. And then it becomes, all right, well, what are you going to do about that? The number one thing that I hear from a complaint from coaches right now is it's always fill in the blank dollar amount. I've given this guy $750,000 and I play him 2 minutes a game. It's always fill in a dollar amount in contrast to contribution of minutes in game time. And they're just so mad. I've got this other guy who's 1/10 the contract. He's working his butt off. And I've got this dude that I paid a lion's share who won't lift a finger. That's the complaint.
That's extraordinary. What a changing landscape there at the college level, I mean, you've mentioned talking about getting the right people into the building and effective and optimal recruitment. And one of the reasons why we're having a conversation today, or the main reason, other than tapping your vast knowledge and experience, and you're always a pleasure to speak to and learn from, is I messaged you recently and I said, look, I've just been seeing so many videos in the last few weeks following the NFL Combine back in April. Would that be right, Scott? And I said I really wanted to get you on to have a conversation about that, the whole psychology around the combine, because as much as we love American sports over here in England, I think the combine is still a bit of a mystery to us. It's a different planet, to be honest, as compared to our university sports, as we'd call them here, going into professional, or even just it just doesn't exist over here at the professional level. And you reliably informed me that, well, you know what, the NBA has just happened and the MLB is going on and the NHL is going to happen. I probably got those the wrong way around, but the combine across all your major sports happens at around this time of year. So I wanted to dive in because you've got so much experience, as we've said, at the college level, but also helping teams recruit players. You're involved yourself from the perspective of psychological testing, specifically your intelligence test AIQ, which we dived into that previously on an episode with you, but super happy to discuss that again and what's been going on there. But you know, I just saw so many fantastic videos of players elated and players disappointed, and there was all kinds of stories coming out. And so I probably don't really know where to start, but I mean, let's just start generically with a helicopter viewpoint. I mean, there's got to be a lot of psychology thrown into a mix. A young player is sitting there wondering, you know, where and when he's going to be recruited. Is that really basically how the combine works?
Yeah. So let's walk through it for your international audience in a way that maybe oversimplifies, but like you said, kind of gives a taste. The process is this: with most leagues, because we don't have relegation, which I think would be super exciting if American
Yes.
sports had relegation.
Yeah, that's a topic in and of itself, right?
Right, yeah, like the University of Alabama gets promoted and maybe the Cincinnati Bengals get relegated or something. Like that would be amazing.
Yeah.
I really do think in a lot of ways you all have created a system that keeps a level of investment, right? But going back to it, I think all of these leagues, what they want is they want viewership, right? They want fan bases to be engaged. And one of the ways to be engaged is to create a level of parity. And so I think parity through the draft is about trying to keep teams that are bad, giving them a competitive advantage of getting to select first. So that way, everybody's kind of really good and that we really just enjoy the games being played versus it's like, well, the outcome's already been declared because team A is just so much more superior than team B. So with that kind of concept of parity, um, the goal for the leagues is parity. Try to make everybody equal, and yet the goal of the teams is to seek competitive advantages. So before we even talk about the psyche of the experience of the players and what they go through on that day, I would say let's take a step back and kind of look at sort of where psychological influence and contribution occurs. I think when we're evaluating talent, there's four domains. There's the physical. Are they big, strong, and fast? And a lot of times that's your high performance director, your physio, that's putting them through some kind of gauntlet to measure their agility, their strength, their deceleration. That's kind of like a new one, not new, but newer, right? We have there's a basketball player right now in the league. His name's Luka Doncic, who,
Yep.
he's in his prime. He's not as big or as strong as some of these other players in the league, but his deceleration is elite. And so what happens is he can kind of like stop on a dime, and these stronger, faster players kind of breeze right by him. Then he has this wide open shot that he lands. So all of a sudden now people are kind of talking about, well, what's his deceleration rate and stuff. So that's the first bucket, is physical. Second bucket is experience or competency. right? And that's just game film. So again, if we're watching football, basketball, hockey, baseball, all of those, it's just what can they do? But the challenge with the game film is who they're competing against. So like with baseball, you can draft guys that are coming out of high school. So you can be interviewing and evaluating 16-year-olds who are kind of going up against other 16-year-olds in comparison to guys that are maybe their third year in college, as well as players who are from Latin American countries or anywhere else in the world. And that can be a wide range of experience. So it gets really challenging when you're trying to compare apples to apples, if you will. The third bucket is personality and character, right? So what's their work ethic? Do they love their sport? What kind of person would they be like in the locker room? And then the fourth bucket is intelligence. How do they see and digest the unsolvable puzzle of the game? And that's where the AIQ comes in. So going to these four domains, the ownership or the way that I try to contribute with the teams I work for across all three major leagues, NBA, MLB, and NFL, is I try to take ownership of the personality bucket as well as the intelligence bucket. So people often say, well, how do you capture personality? How do you do these interviews? And it's interesting because, there's a ton of self-report measures that exist. But when I look at the literature on self-report measures, there's this benchmark study that shows you can have people take the same self-report measure 3 weeks apart. Same measure, just do it 3 weeks apart, 2 times. And 50% of the time, you'll get a totally different profile. So it's sort of like, hey, I've got this warrior mentality on Monday, and then 3 weeks from now, I've got more of a cerebral landscape. I'm a nerd now. So going back to it, like personality, I find is a really hard thing to capture and understand. Um, Self-report measures are fraught with issues, and then the other mechanism is people change. Trying to say who a person is before they become multimillionaires, trying to change or assess who a person is before um, they become married or have kids. Like people change all the time. In fact, you can have people change on those personality inventories. You can have them change. Just say, hey, I want you to take this, but I want you to think of yourself as a son versus I want you to think of this as a footballer. And that'll cause a change in profile. So what I tell teams is I say, look, when I provide these psychological profiles, the concept here is that you're getting a window or a snapshot of who they are. And really, the goal is to look and think about, are they a good connection or a good fit for our organization? Where things, because sometimes what will happen is like a GM will say or a coach will say, like, well, can you tell me if he's going to be an all-star? And I'm like, honestly, man, if I could predict a person to be an all-star, I would use those kinds of superpowers to prevent like murders and terrorist activity and all sorts of other more, so, like human beings are unbelievably complicated and complex.
Yeah.
But I do think you can create an environment where people will reveal who they are and how they think and how they feel. And then you can assess, is this a really good fit for how our coaches like to think, act, and feel? And that I think is possible. So that's that third bucket. And then the fourth bucket is the AIQ, which again is all about like things like pattern recognition and processing speed and being able to understand the game plan and how to teach them best and how to put them in situations of success.
We're just pausing on that, just going back to that third bucket, because we'll unpack the fourth bucket a little bit more, I'm sure, because I know that's such a big part of your work. But do organisations, because Premier League clubs here in England, if we're talking about soccer, football, there's a lot of talk now about sporting directors, technical directors, heads of recruitment, striving to find all kinds of ways to learn about the character of a player coming in. And like you, I'm very skeptical. I know historically, you and I have always had interesting conversations about personality science, and I'm more of a fan. I completely agree with you with regard the self-report measures, and they are fraught with problems and difficulties. And I've been asked to bring them into organisations before, and I've pushed back heavily because of the reasons that you've spoken about. I've always really enjoyed personality science because I think they provide us with some frameworks with regard the tendencies of behaviours that people portray, and there's some really good, I think, some frameworks that give us an explanation with relation to human behaviour. So I think they can be useful explanatory tools, but really impossible to say this person is like this and they're going to be great to bring in. But what you hear a lot in articles is the hierarchy in, let's say, Premier League clubs or European soccer clubs, investigating somebody's character and going online and trying to learn about somebody. What have they written about in the past, and what have their behaviours been like historically at other clubs, other organisations, other teams? And probably like you, and I don't think I'll form a question, but I'd like to put more meat on the bone here. I'm just very skeptical. I think you can pick one person up, and if you put them in the kind of environment that's wrong for them, irrespective of how great they were previously, they might not be so great in this new environment. I think environment is so much of this. So to speak to your point, are you therefore saying to these GMs, well, look, it's less about the character of the player and it's more about our ability to flex based on who this person is when they do come in to the building?
Yeah, I mean, is it about flex? Maybe. I mean, yeah, I think yes, I would say that contribute. But I guess where I tend to land and default to is about relationship dynamics. And maybe that's what you mean by flex. See, I think
Yeah,
where I kind of pivot a little, yeah, I think where I probably pivot a little bit on flex is again, in America, in North America right now, we have such a shift in power that, you know, like in the world of business, they talk about service leadership, which I am not a fan of that term, because if you make it a democracy and you ask 100 employees and one boss, do you like the concept of service leadership where the one serves the 100? Well, the vote is going to be 100 to 1 with the 100 employees all voting for yes. I love the idea of the leader catering to me. Now, I do like supportive leadership, and the way I differentiate between service leadership and supportive leadership is service leadership is I'm here to serve you. Supportive leadership is what do you need from me in order for you to do your job? So, going back to the world of athletics, what I'm seeing right now is there's such a shift in power. Again, some of these players are getting paid more than their coaches. So, what's kind of weird about the world of sports, right, is you can have coaches that are getting paid more than their bosses, and then you can have players that are getting paid more than their coaches and more than their coaches' bosses. Like the only person that makes more money than some of these players that are affiliated to the organization is the owner. And then it becomes a question of how involved is the owner? Is the owner kind of doing this like a hobby because they're just a billionaire who owns a yacht and owns a football club? Or are they, is this a family business or is this something where they're invested? Um, the best owners I've been around, they're in the building every day and they're unbelievable human beings and they're completely invested in every aspect of the organization. And some of the owners or some of the teams that I've watched that have really struggled, where you ask, like, where's the owner? Or you even just say, where's the owner's office? And they'll say the owner's office is in like another city in another state in another time zone from where the team's located. And the owner just comes for the games on Sunday kind of thing. So going back to it, when you talk about flex, and I think this is why I kind of took a step back, though I think we're probably saying the same thing, is organizations I find are getting frustrated with, we've got X number of players, right? It's 53-man roster in football, 18-person roster in basketball. It's like I've got all these players, and now you're telling me I have to treat each and every single one of them as unique flowers and butterflies. Like, I don't have the time and attention and the ability to focus to individualize every single one of these for all these people. And I'm like, I'm right there with you. So I think I go back to the idea and the concept, which is it's not so much about understanding the personality, which again, it's fluid and flexible. It's really about understanding the relationship between the environment and the person. So if you have a coach who's very transactional, if you have a coach who's very much about high standards and low feelings, you might be best served with somebody who is a player that responds well to that kind of authoritarian style of coaching. Similarly, if you have a more relational coach, one that's known as being player friendly, you might benefit from grabbing a player who holds the rest of the locker room accountable. I think there is kind of almost a yin yang balance of forces in the world of any kind of sub community or team where you need the right kind of nurturance and you need the right kind of accountability. And you need those two to balance each other. When one gets out of whack, I see struggle.
There's that place, and I don't want to get too far away from the combine, but it almost makes me
Yeah.
feel that the recruitment of the head coach is critical, and surely therefore there needs to be more demand on a head coach having the capacity to slide, using the term flex again, to flex along or to slide along that transactional, transformational continuum. That surely the ultimate coach is the one that, yes, has the knowledge of the X's and O's, but from a relational perspective is able to slide along and be authoritative in one instance, but also lean into supportive, to use your word, on the more transformational side of things.
Yeah. So it's funny. This is my 13th year in the pro sports space. And again, it's been across 3 leagues. And what I have found, and predominantly it's been in the NFL and NBA. But what I found was when I first started, I really focused primarily on the players. I was like, you know what? If we get the players right, everything will take care of itself. And then I started to realize, no, 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 it's really the coaches. Like the coaches have so much influence of who plays and how they play and how they get prepared. So I was like, let's focus on the coaches. And now I find myself really focusing on the owners, that when you're looking and thinking about impact, it's the owners that seem to be like, there's an old expression, the fish rots from the head first. So I think owners have a tendency to hire smart people, good owners hire really smart team presidents. They hire really smart GMs and head coaches. And then those team presidents, GMs, and head coaches end up finding really smart, good, talented players. So it really is this kind of trickle down effect.
Kind of a cascade of intelligence from top down.
Yeah, yes. And so what's interesting is, and I stumbled upon this. I didn't intentionally do this, but the first pro team I worked for was the Miami Dolphins. And and the reason, before I took the job, I asked to meet with the owner, Steve Ross. And it was funny because I met Steve Ross at the Steve Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. So it's a little intimidating to go into a meeting with someone who you're meeting at a building named after them. And inside the building is this like 90-foot mural. So it was funny because I was like, when I was scheduling the appointment to meet with him. So here's the story. And again, we are so in the weeds. We're not talking about the combine at all. But the Miami Dolphins offered me a job. And before I accepted, I said, I really need to talk to ownership and kind of figure this out. And the only reason I did that was because I knew that job security in the pro space was like a sneeze in the wind. And I just felt like I wanted to know who I was going to be working for. So I coordinated a meeting with Mr. Ross at the Mr. Ross School, at the Steve Ross School of Business. And he said, just meet me at the mural. And I was like, okay. Now I'd never been in the school of business, but so I'm looking around. I'm like, hey, where's the mural? I turn, there it is. It's this 90-foot mural, oil painting of Steve Ross. And he's just standing underneath it. And like the dean of the school comes out. And he's like, Mr. Ross, what are you doing here? And he's like, oh, I'm just here to meet with this young buck. And he goes, well, would you like to use my office? And he's like, no, we'll be fine. So anyways, long story, slightly less long. And sorry, I hope this is entertaining for folks. It's fun for me to at least wax poetic and reminisce. I said, Mr. Ross, is there anything else that you have your name on? Because the only thing I have my name on is my underwear. And he goes, you know what, Scott, that's pretty funny. And I went, I think I can work for a guy. So it was a bit of a gamble, right? Like when you're talking to a billionaire and he kind of holds your future ambitions and career. But at the same time, I was like, all right, I think I can roll with this dude.
Yeah.
And it was we worked together for 5 years. It was awesome.
So conversations with, agreements with, processes set up in place with the GM. As we've said, you're a sports psychologist who functions at every level, works at every level of the organization. Really, it's trying to hit the highest point so that things can cascade down. You've discovered that's just such a powerful place to be, or perhaps the place where you can have the most influence, because then you can have the influence on the head coach, the other coaches, right the way down to the players. So in many respects, the macro level first, down through the mesosystemic level, right the way through to the micro system.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you took the words right out of my mouth. I was thinking macro, micro. What I would say is I don't know if I would prioritize one over the other.
Yeah.
I think what's neat is if you can have multiple touch points, when you can have a 360-degree impact, then you can do both simultaneously. Like it's not a this or that, or it's not a this first, then that. I think it's a this and that.
Yeah. Yeah. And also rather than either or. And in many respects, we are, and also talking about the combine, because to your point, the GM, the head coach is, these people are going to, obviously they matter to the combine. Clearly they do, but they matter from micro levels, don't they? In terms of the relational piece with the players coming in. If they've optimized their environment and culture, then they have a better chance to accommodate the character of the player coming in.
Yeah, like sometimes the metaphor I use is like, what size is your bullseye, right? Like when you have a healthy environment, when you have a lot of stability, when you have a good conceptualization of what you're doing, the bullseye becomes larger, right? So, again, my day job right now is with the Golden State Warriors. We have some amazing players. Like Steph Curry is a legend. Draymond Green is an unbelievable accountability element in the locker room. Like there's just a lot of really good people that gives us a larger bullseye. We have a coach, Steve Curry's Hall of Famer, legend. And so we have a larger bullseye. It doesn't mean we can't mess around. It just means we have a larger bullseye to get it right. By contrast, and I don't want to say a team, because I would hate to besmirch a team or speak negatively, but it's just the idea of like some people, it's almost like you need a game changer. Like you need someone who can flip the script and kind of get you out of the stuck mortar that you're in. So I think bringing it back to it and just kind of summarizing the concept, when I work for a team, when I'm doing draft analysis, the psychological profiling, I first start with, I need to know who you are and what's missing or what you need in the organization. So I'll talk to teams, I'll talk to the players, I'll talk to the coaches, I'll talk to the front office, and I try to gather, it's, I think you would agree with me on this. I find it somewhat comical, all these words that we put on walls. I've now called this ghost culture, right? Grit and toughness and, hard work and like all these catchphrases, like the things that we put on walls, they're great, but it's ghost culture. The real culture is sort of the state of being. Like if being professional is important and you implement a rule like you should be at every meeting 5 minutes early, That's professional, and that's just a state of being. You don't have to put on the walls, be professional. Just show up to the meeting at 5 minutes before it starts every time. So I go back to this idea, which is I try to study the team and the organization. Who are they and what do they need? What are their strengths? What are their wobbles? Everything else. Once I have that, then I form a body of questions that try to highlight that alignment. And then I ask the players those kinds of questions. So, for example, I might ask a question like, let's say competitiveness is a trait that we really value and we maintain at a high level. Like we
Yeah.
like people who compete.
Yeah.
So I'll ask a question like, have you ever been the reason one of your teams lost? And then I'll say, what did you do after you lost? What was the first thing you did? And that doesn't have a
Yeah.
right or wrong answer to it, but it does give an opportunity for them to explain their process. And then the front office people can go, that's our kind of guy. I really like the fact that what he did. So I'll give you a concrete example because, again, I was with the NBA draft last week, the combine last week. And I asked, have you ever lost? The guy said yes. I said, what happened? He said, I missed the game winning shot. I said, what did you do? What was the first thing you did? He goes, I stayed on the court till everybody left. And then he said, I took 20 shots from the place where I missed. And I said, 20 shots? Because he said, no, let me clarify. I did 20 makes. So he didn't say how many times he shot to get to 20 makes, but he was like, I'm going to hit 20 makes before I leave the court. And so I asked him, I said, so I have a tendency to ask 2, 3, 4 questions deep. I think most people stop after they hear the first answer, which is good, but I feel like there's more. So, have you ever been the reason you lost? Yes. What did you do? I took 20 makes. And then I said, why did you do it? And that was the part where I was most curious. It's like, are you exercising demons? Are you imprinting? Like, what's going on here? And that was where he gave some really neat introspection. And I went, this reminds me of some of the guys that are on our roster. I think this is a guy who would fit in the locker. Like a guy who does that is very similar to a guy like Draymond Green, who is an unbelievably hard worker. Stuff like that.
Are you going 3 or 4 questions deep because you're trying to reduce the chances of a social desirability answer, if you like? Because it strikes me, you ask a question, people, yeah, I was gutted and I stayed on the court for the next 4 days just hitting baskets, right? And you're thinking, well, that's just a socially desirable answer. But you're asking and asking and asking in order, and I'm guessing you're kind of observing them and actually, at least striving to professionally decide, is this person just BSing me, or is this person genuinely coming from a place of authenticity?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good read. There's another element to it, which is agents are always trying to help their clients look good, right? And
Yes.
that's their job. A really good agent's job is to prepare the player and
Mm.
prepare them for the physical drills, prepare them for the emotional roller coaster, prepare them for the interviews. So sometimes they'll bring in an expert who says, here's what you want to say, here's what teams are looking for. So to your point, it's not so much an inauthenticity, but it could be a scripted or rehearsed answer.
Gotcha.
And so sometimes you want to push through that. Sometimes you also want to assess how much self-awareness or emotional intelligence they might have too. Sometimes some of these players have been coddled at such a young age that they haven't really developed their own emotional skill sets. So it's just kind of looking what's in the bank, so to speak.
And if I may ask, where are you devising these questions out of thin air? Are you basing them on other self-reported measures, a conglomerate of those? Is it a mix of both? Yeah, how are you coming up with them on the spot? Is there a fluidity there to the questions? How does this work?
Yeah, so I found again, my primary focus was about the relationship. So the concept was to give the player a chance to really kind of open up the rib cage and share who he is and what he believes, and then the team can witness if that's a desirable guy or not. And it's like, even if a person acts like, say, a jerk, sometimes that's exactly what we're looking for. Is, we've just got a bunch of nice guys in our locker room. We could use a little bit of jerk infusion. So uh, the way I like to kind of talk to the players, I start the process by just saying, like, look, there's no right or wrong answers. There's just your answers. Just be true to who you are. And we've come to the conclusion that we would rather you go be good for someone else if we know you can't be great for us. And the only way we know you'll be great for us is if you tell us who you really are, and then we can assess if this feels like a good fit. So I'll give you another story. We had a player. This is another basketball story. And I probably have basketball in my brain because, like I said, it was last week. We had a player. So I asked him, I said, would you rather have a max contract, which could be about $250 million, or would you rather have a league minimum but win a championship? And the player said, I know what you want. You guys like winners and you want championships. So I know you want me to say win a championship on the league minimum, which of course every owner would want. Wait, you're telling me I can win a championship and not have to pay a lot of money? Like, that's a no-brainer. So he was smart, right? Like, so clearly he's teaching me he's smart. I know what you're trying to get me to say. He said, however, you asked me to be honest with you. So now he's sharing with me this almost moral dilemma that he has. You want me to be honest, but I also know what you want me to say. And he's putting it on the table. So I'm like, oh, this is super cool. Like, this guy is so neat. He's such an amazing human being. And this was the moment where I was like, God, man, like, I've been doing this for about 15 years. I gave this guy my cell phone number. When this was all said and done, I just said, dude, I would love to stay in touch. I hope we get you, but if we don't, like, anything you need from me, you got. Here's my cell phone number. Like, let's be buddies, kind of thing. I mean, I was
Will you be my best mate?
Well, totally. I mean, and the amazing thing was he's 19 years old. So going back to the story, he says, look, I know what you want me to say, but you asked me to be honest. And I said, you're right. So please be honest with us. He goes, I'd take the max contract. And we said, I appreciate you. So now all of a sudden we go, look, not only does this validate everything else that we had in the other aspects of the interview, we could go any of his answers. We now know to be honest, because he's saying, I figured out what you're looking for, and I'm telling you that I would vote the honest answer. So we could have stopped there and been like, cool. But again, I tend to ask the second, third, fourth question. So I said, why do you want the max contract? And this is the answer that blew me away, where I was like, here's my cell phone. Whatever you need, I got you, man. He said, my grandparents were slaves, and I am the first person in my family to go to university. He said, if I have a max contract, my children could go to university and they can get enrolled in a university without having to play a sport. He then added, like a lot of students at the university level, he didn't get to pick the major that he was most interested in. He picked the major that the basketball team fit his schedule best. So he said, my kids wouldn't have to play sports if they didn't want to, and they could pick any major they want. That way they could choose any career path that they want, and they could have more longevity in their life well-being, like being a lawyer or a doctor, than just being a basketball player, which is the average length of 3 years, kind of thing. He goes, not only that, but my children's children will have this opportunity. He was talking about generational wealth before people were referencing generational wealth as a thing. And what he was saying is, I can change the narrative of my family from being the descendants of slaves to being kingmakers. It was so powerful. It was so meaningful. And the good news is we drafted him, and he's been everything that we hoped him to be. Like, he is the consummate professional. He's great in the locker room. He takes his craft seriously, and he's just a really good human being. He's a great person to cheer for.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Just fantastic insights, Scott. Really appreciate this. Just going back sort of 45 minutes, you talked about the combine. The very purpose of the combine is about parity. And it's something I've always considered is, if I'm the best player in college sport, I'm about to be recruited by the worst team, is my understanding of what you're talking about here.
That's right.
And I'm just, as a sports psychologist, I'm thinking that's surely got to play on somebody's psychology, or does it at all? I mean, are you just so delighted to be recruited into the NBA or the NFL or NHL? The best player goes to ostensibly the bottom side. Thoughts?
So let's pull on that thread for a sec. Let's go back to the NFL. The two most influential people in the building in the NFL is the head coach and the quarterback. Every time they enter a room, regardless of the room, the athletic training room, the training table, whatever it may be, when the head coach and the quarterback enter the room changes. So you go, okay, so now let's take a look at the success rate of quarterbacks that are drafted in the first round. It is 51%. So for every quarterback that is a Hall of Famer, there's another quarterback that absolutely flames out. And the question is why? Both are talented enough. And to your point, like when you're the number one overall pick, like Caleb Williams was 2 years ago with the Bears, or you've got Joe Burrow was number one pick for the Cincinnati Bengals. Like, it's a tremendous amount of pressure. And to your point about changing, so let's talk about the draft and the psyche of the draft and draft day. Here's the interesting thing. I have found that the complexity of life is like watching a movie, but who the lead character is in the movie changes. So what do I mean by that? Let's take a movie that everybody kind of knows, like Star Wars. If you watch the first ones that came out from 1977 and 1983, Luke Skywalker's the hero and Darth Vader's the villain. Now, if you watch the ones that came out in the 90s, where you have the history of Darth Vader, all of a sudden now Anakin Skywalker, who becomes Darth Vader, spoiler alert for some of your fans, all of a sudden Anakin Skywalker is the hero, not the villain. So it's really fascinating, right? Because bringing it back to the draft, if you look at it through the player who's being selected, that movie, he's the hero where he changes the organization. This is his moment. It is an amazing experience, something he's dreamed his whole life. It's a celebration for his family and friends and everybody else. However, the player who's been on the team for the last 3 years, who starts in the position that this guy plays, is now going, that's my villain. So I bring up what is often for me a very bittersweet moment. As excited as I am for the player that's being selected, I have a moment where I pause and reflect on the player who's watching this draft going, I think I just got put on notice. For those that are not in sports that listen to your podcast, imagine once a year, like let's say you're a lawyer or you're an accountant or anything else, and you've got partnership in your firm or whatever the case is. Imagine once a year you're holding your breath to see if they hire someone who's really basically meant to replace you. So that doesn't just hold true to those two individuals. It holds true to everybody around those individuals. So for example, if you're a position coach, like a wide receiver coach, and you're going, I really could use some help in my building, and they do not or in my room, and they don't draft a wide receiver this year. Because the way the draft works is just like, hey, we had more needs in the defensive line room, or we, a lot of the people that we really liked from the wide receiver list, they got taken before we had a chance to get them, that kind of stuff. Well, now all of a sudden in your movie, you're looking at this draft and going like, gosh darn it, you know? Now let's go to the flip side to famous stories, highly regarded stories. The biggest one this year was like Shedeur Sanders, who some thought was a top 5 pick, and he ends up going all the way down to the 5th round. Or you have Aaron.
That's Deion Sanders' son.
Correct. And then you also have like Aaron Rodgers, who many thought was the number 1 overall pick, who drops all the way to the 20s. So I have often argued that for some, the draft is a dream come true. And for others, it is a traumatic experience. And sometimes that and I want to be careful when I use the word trauma, because we're not talking like, plane crash trauma or a sexual assault trauma. Like, it's not a capital T trauma, but there can be a lowercase t trauma. And the lowercase t trauma is this kind of wake up call of, wow, 19 teams didn't want me. I thought I was better than that. I thought I was more valued than that. What does this mean? So, something that I often like, if I'm at a cocktail party with people who are not in the world of sports, I just find sometimes the language is hard to comprehend, or the perspective is hard to comprehend, because they look at these players' journeys the way that they would watch a soap opera. And they don't realize, like, the amount of time and effort and sacrifice that these young men and young women engage in for this moment to not go as planned is very, very painful. So going back to the yin-yang balance of life, you have, for some, this euphoric moment of pure joy and celebration. And for others, it can be an absolute nightmare of trauma and tragedy. And that's a little hyperbolic, but I do find there is that experience.
It's certainly emotional, isn't it? I mean, I really enjoy, and I don't mean enjoy in any kind of perverse way, just to enjoy. You spoke earlier about the fascination that perhaps American audiences, American sports fans have of promotion and relegation and the advantages it brings, and it certainly does. I don't think we'd change anything over here with relation to that, but I think for some of us looking over, the fascination of draft day is just incredible. And as a sports psychologist, just looking at the highs, the lows, everything that you've eloquently articulated about what goes into recruiting a player. Of course, that happens here, but in a slightly different way. And as you've requested there, it's looking at it through the lens of empathy, irrespective of the behaviour of young people. They're only young. It's having empathy with relation to that moment, because it's life changing. Scott, brilliant as always. Really, really enjoyed that. We can go in so many different directions, and I apologise that we didn't centre in more on the AIQ. We have done before. We will do again. Absolutely no doubts. Definitely be finding an excuse to get you back on. How can people find you, follow you, and get in contact?
Yeah, I think the best mechanism is to go to the website, the AIQ.team website, which is a nice platform. I don't post a lot on social media. Maybe I should do a better job of that. But I am on LinkedIn. I am on Twitter. I just don't follow it. You can also email me directly. It's just sgoldman@aiq.team. I wouldn't go so far to give you, like, say, my social security numbers or my bank account routing numbers, but I try to be very accessible to people.
Brilliant. Okay, Scott, thanks so much for today.
Yeah, thank you. As always, this was fun.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast episode, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, think. So please do get in touch via X or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the show. If you do have any suggestions, I'll be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.